Okay, so I'm unmuted, so hopefully people can hear me. The agenda includes Cindy at the beginning, so now I'm like off a little bit. But I want to say first, thank you very much for attending. This, and those of you who are online, thank you for attending. We try and make this as accessible as possible. We're also recording it, so it should be available afterwards, and we'll send that out as well. No state secrets will be shared, so it's public material that we're going to cover today. That being said, it's really kind of a briefing to bring you up to speed of where this is going and where we hope it will go in the next couple of months. My name is Faye Farmer. I am the Executive Director of Research Development at ASU, which is a unit underneath Cindy Sagers, the VPR. We are responsible for large-scale initiatives across campus, kind of helping them write and document their progress. Specifically to this call, we have proposal managers who are available to support the submission of the preliminary and full proposals for this call. We also have competitive intelligence. So Karen Walker and Jamie online are part of that team, and they have done some analysis of the STC. I'll talk a little bit about that. We also have events, which is LJ, who masterfully coordinates these things, make sure you're reminded of them and sets them up. So thank you, LJ. And then Haley. I was like, there's one more. Haley in the back is limited submissions, and she also plays an important role. And here she is. So I was just introducing the people in my office, so nice timing. So Dr. Sagers is the Vice President of Research at ASU, and here to welcome you all.
And I'll do that right now. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. I recognize some faces finally after being at ASU for 6 months, and very excited to see what you guys crank out for our STC competition. What will happen today is Faye and her crew will take you through the logistics of how we're going to roll this out, give some guidelines about what we think are competitive ideas in the broad sense, not in terms of any disciplinary sense. We're challenging you to come up with some really creative ideas. I think NSF is really pushing hard on its 10 big ideas. So as you think about what you want to do, work under that umbrella of the 10 big ideas. This convergence thing is real at NSF. It's kind of diffuse the first time you look at it. It's hard to interpret. It's hard to put any real meat on that bone. So give it some work with Faye and her team if you don't get it. So convergence is a big thing. The future of work in the United States and globally is also huge. So that is not gonna escape the attention of the STC reviewers. STC is reputational for our campus, and we wanna win. So we want you to work hard on this, and we wanna give you all the support we can to get it done. It's a big deal. If there are any questions at all that I can help you with, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. My name is Cindy Sagers. I'm the Vice President for Research, and my office is in CAD. And unless there are any questions for me directly, I'll just say dash ahead, get this work done, and make us proud. Anything more, Faye?
No, I think that the important part, where you play a role is also in steering the research agenda at the university, and in terms of chairing the limited submissions for these.
Thank you for that. So we are working very hard with National Science Foundation to figure out why a university the size of ASU gets 2 submissions exactly the same as the University of West Des Moines. This just doesn't make any sense to us. Now, there's no question that NSF is only funding good ideas. There's no question about that. But what happens is that they're pushing that decision of what's a good idea down to the level of the university. Until we get them to change their minds radically about how they're running these competitions, it's on our shoulders to decide what proposals go forward from this community. So the proposal internal submission process will be really, really tough. We have so much awesome fundable research here at ASU, and we can only put forward 2 submissions. Three.
A limited amount.
3 still pretty, 50% more. Yeah, so don't get me wrong, it's still gonna be tough. And so deciding what the priorities for this campus are. So as you're thinking about where the strengths of your ideas, you bring it forward, think about the campus as a whole. So it's not going to be just your research team. It's going to be your research team and how it fits in with the agenda, the research agenda of the campus. Who's setting the research agenda of the campus? The president and the people that work for the president. So I'd encourage you to think about maybe what is GEOS doing? What is this Global Futures Initiative? What does it mean to us? Think about the ERCs that are currently funded and how that fits into the broader research agenda of the campus. You'll need to work very with clear focus and absolute alacrity on this workforce thing. Your broader impacts of this are not just going to fall into place with a few references and notes. It has to be integral to the work that you're doing. And how you partner with entities inside and outside of the campus will also be really important. If there is some hint that there will be industry engagement, as there has to be, or philanthropic engagement, work with FACE team to see how that can come out in the proposal. So how did I do?
Great, checked all the boxes.
Could I make a quick comment here?
Sure, that's Dr. Spence from a current STC. Go ahead.
Okay, great.
So I have a list of lessons learned from the successful STC we have at ASU. I'm the director of science for that. It runs for 10 years. It's $50 million. And I could send this list to our Vice President for Research if you like. The important point, some 7 faculty here at ASU. There are 7 campuses involved. It's very important to understand that this is a multi-campus submission, which must address a very large and important scientific problem, which requires collaboration with other institutions for success. And the key word there is requires. So it's a multi-campus institution, and we may find that some of the faculty at ASU are members of an STC led by a different institution. So they're just some of the points emphasizing the need for collaboration with other institutions. And I can list what I've found, particularly with the education program and the diversity and outreach and so forth, and send that to you as needed. John Spence in physics here.
Great.
Thanks, John. It's so great to hear your voice. And I think, of course, that will be essential for this group as they push their proposals forward. And I think, as John suggests, this isn't just about naming other institutions. It's how can you create a league of universities, a league of entities pushing forward on this agenda item. So I'm going to let you take it from there then. Good luck, Faye. Good luck to all of you. Look forward to reviewing your proposals.
Thank you. Somehow I messed up my screen, so I want to make sure that I did. I like order. No,
It looks right over here.
it looks right online, but not in here. Okay, well, you guys are gonna have to deal with it. Sorry, because I like it online, because that's a recording. So thank you, Cindy, who just jotted out. This is important for John. Dr. Spence will have his own solid connection here, and we'll give him the floor. But I will happily take the list of lessons learned. It is a vast wealth of experience that member brings to the table, and that team does too. So we're going to leverage that. So I'll review this solicitation. Dr. Spence will speak, and then we're going to have Haley, the limited submissions guru, and Kellyanne Lau, the proposal manager guru, talk about what the submission looks like after that. So the solicitation itself, if you don't have it, if you haven't committed to memory and tattooed it on your arm, then what are you waiting for? This is what you need to do. So the directorates that are involved, it's important to look at all the directorates. They all decide, they all participate. These in particular participate and all kick in money. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's your internal competition is an ASU competition where you have to balance NSF priorities plus ASU's priorities, but you also must then pivot to the white paper, and their priorities are your priorities then. Okay, so the program goals, I'm not going to go into huge amount of detail for the solicitation because we should all be reading it and tattooing it on our forearms. The program goals, the important part and what sets this aside from the engineering research centers, the MERSECs, other things, is that it is also a center level award, but it facilitates knowledge transfer in a way that is very unique. So Science and Technology Centers is literally that, an integrative partnership. So it's a much more distributed knowledge framework and network than what an ERC or MRSEC do. And if you're not familiar with those programs, don't worry about it. They're just a little bit more solidly discipline oriented. The program, again, expects to make 5 awards beginning fiscal year 2021. Dr. Gerber mentioned what happened 2 years ago when we had these big kickoffs. We had a series of 3 meetings in a really long time ago, and eons ago, right? We're a little bit older, wiser now. We're in an effort to prepare for this, so hopefully those teams have continued to mature. I know most of you have, so that's not a challenge. But the important thing to note is that this has been delayed 2 years. It's the longest in program history that this has been delayed. So there's a few things, and surprisingly, this solicitation hasn't changed that much. So we're not sure exactly what that is. Is it a funding issue? Is it, and if you guys have insight in that, anybody have insight in that? Okay, so none of us know. We've been pestering this program officer for a very long time about it. And we're not the only university. We chose not to do a limited submissions, and instead we let all the teams kind of mature and bubble up and apply for proposals as they went. And so now we're at this situation where you should be prepared to submit for limited submissions. Importantly for this STC, that if you're not familiar with the structure of a center level award at NSF, you do need to prepare and think, what does that 4-year review look like? Because then you submit a new proposal for the next 5 years after that. So they do say they will award 5 years of funding contingent on an annual review. That's fine. And for the most part, nobody really falls short on that. But you will have to think broadly or have more vision into the next 5 years after that. Because really what you're aiming for is 10 years of funding in a single white paper. So you're making the case that you have enough to make significant scientific and enough scholarship and student production for the first 5 years, but also this long-term vision for the 10-year sustaining award. And then in the last 2 years, similar to ERC and MRSEC and other organizations that they fund, there's a 2-year phase out where you're going to lose NSF funding, and what does your center look like after that? Okay, scope. You have 5 years, exactly what I just said, $25 million up to $5 million, inclusive of F&A. So this, if you know, and perhaps Dr. Spence can talk about it, seems like a lot of money initially, but when you start allocating it out to 5 universities, it becomes $250,000 a year, right? So just be cognizant of how you distribute that funding. It's not required at limited submissions to describe how you're allocating that budget. It is required for the white paper. I would reference it. It would not hurt you to figure out how to include that in your limited submissions description. Okay, limitations. We do want to talk about you do need institutional commitment. So when Dr. Sagers was talking about how you fit into the grander scheme at ASU, this is what you can reference for the white paper and potentially for the limited submissions. The institutional commitment is not cost share. Cost share is prohibited per the solicitation, but it does show an investment in your capabilities, your person, your facilities, your location, some kind of investment. And that can be phrased any way, shape you want to phrase it. Importantly, so if you wanted Dr. Spence on your team, he could participate as long as the idea was significantly different from the current one that he's participating in. Now, this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but I wanted to bring it up. And then it also was important that they stated an STC complements ERCs, MRSECs, and other large-scale investments in center-level awards. For those of you who know, no, it's the next one. So we'll talk a little bit about the ERCs we have on campus next. But it does not preclude additional funding through these mechanisms. So if you can make a case that this will augment or somehow advance a current investment, and that means STCs here, ERCs here, ERCs somewhere else, MRSEC somewhere else, any other kind of center level investment that the NSF has made, it doesn't, and you're participating in that, does not preclude you from participating here. As stated, we only have 3 preliminary proposals advancing from the university. We've tried to optimize review time and enough time for you to write a limited submissions proposal with enough time to write a white paper. It's challenging no matter how you cut it, so apologies, but this is what we could come up with in the time that was afforded to us. You must be a full-time faculty member to be a PI, and you cannot participate on other STCs. So, as a PI or co-PI. However, if that STC does not, I want to talk about, there is a potential where you could be a co-PI on another proposal that's submitted through another university. Totally legit, totally fine. They will have an internal review likely, and they will select that submission. You will then have to have a choice to go through that university or through ASU. I recommend that you don't try and game the system, but think about your options as alternate routes in like an alternate choose your own reality book, right? So if you're a PI or a co-PI on some, you can't be a PI. So if you're a co-PI on something else from another university, what does their internal review look like and what's the timeline for that? Something to consider. And then if that does not advance through another university or at any time is not advanced through the NSF system, you can join another STC program. So something to think about in terms of your network and how the ebb and flow of leadership could go so that someone gets an STC. I know that Dr. Spence can probably talk about this from direct experience, the initial submission for his STC. Past STCs, now this is courtesy of Jamie Welch, who's also online, so a competitive intelligence person, one of them many qualified people we have in my office. And she did this map of past STCs, and we see how it's distributed. One was in Arizona at the U of A called Sahara and finished in 2000. Bill's nodding his head. I think it's 99 or 2000. So there is a distribution, and you can see that. This is by year for award. And I tried to figure out who's coming off for renewal, and
There's 11 right now.
11 coming off for, there's 11
I don't
active.
know coming off right now. I haven't checked.
So that was a fact. So who they're gonna, they have 5 awards. Theoretically, we have to figure out if those are 5 or 5 sunsetting.
They dropped 7 since 2016.
So 7, they've dropped 7
Yeah.
since 2016. So it's important to see what NSF is prioritizing in terms of sunsetting off, what's being replaced, what's not being replaced. So we'll have an analysis out probably in the next month or so. It's more important, I think, as you position your white paper than for the internal submission. But it's an interesting facet. For us, we have an ERC, so we have 2 ERCs. We're one of 2 in the nation, and so we had this ask where it doesn't matter if we have an ERC and STC together, and it turns out no. In fact, it probably would work in our benefit. There's no real detriment to having additional funding. Same goes for MRSAC, so we're continuing. We have a MRSAC out for the preliminary stage, so we're optimistic. We have not won an STC at ASU. So one thing that Jamie did come out with, which I read, now this is last year's discussion and analysis, so it was important to, Jamie has a, it is somewhat dated, but since we haven't had a solicitation, I still think it's relevant. These are her findings from this analysis last year. I want to re-hit on NSF goals and priorities and those 10 big ideas. 10 big ideas need to show up. Not all 10. 1 would be fine, but they do need to be referenced. The international connections, some projects. For those of you who are considering an international partnership, you should be aware that the fulcrum of your partnership should be domestic. And then for diversity, fascinatingly, Jamie found that this mechanism is the most diverse in all of the large scale funding mechanisms, which kind of makes sense because STCs are very discipline agnostic, right? And she's strikingly higher than the National Trend for STEM disciplines. So I want you to, that's a real huge takeaway. And then she also identified that there is no real effect on large funding opportunities, so you can continue to pursue the other centers, and as a university, you can continue to pursue those. And then she also said that it does spawn new awards as you mature the STC, which makes sense, and that's what NSF is kind of hoping for in all of their large scale mechanisms. But it was nice to have validation of that. I'll pause. Dr. Gerber, did you have a question? That's okay. Are there questions online? Okay, if not, I'm going to jump right to Dr. Spence. And we can see you if you want to come on to, there we go. He's gotten upright, so hold on a second, let me, I mean, can I get out of this?
You just stop sharing here.
Stop sharing.
Okay. The main thing I'd say is that you need a big idea with a huge scientific payoff, which can only be solved or tackled because of collaboration between several institutions. And I'd suggest writing this down, but I'll send you an email with the summarizing these points later. Let me say what are the usual mistakes. The first usual mistake is to have too many PIs at too many institutions, because people just invite their friends to be on this thing. And I wouldn't want more than perhaps 5 institutions. We have 7, and it's a stretch, and where you're required to review the professors in it to evaluate them. And we have, in fact, fired 2 of ours in the first 5 years. So, you know, it's very competitive. The second usual mistake is to fail because of your educational program. And that's the reason most STC proposals are turned down. It's because their educational program is not creative enough. So that was also a problem. I mean, ours, there were 3 awarded, I think, and there were over 100 in the finals. So the odds are very small for getting this, only a few percent. And most of the rejected ones had inadequate education programs. Ours is based on Puerto Rico. We fund faculty's research there, and we hold our international conferences down there. So ours started in 2013. We were successful. We got funding, and it's just been renewed. I think we are, according to the NSF, one of probably the most successful STC as judged by their productivity measures in the year, well, that they have running at the currently. So I made some notes here on some things to think about. If you're planning to direct this thing, what you're in for, which is what I do as the director of science for ours, every couple of weeks you'll need to give a talk about it for 10 years. About a third of them will be overseas, right? And your talks will have to cover the work of all the faculty. So we have in our Stanford and UCSF and Buffalo and Cornell, and my job is to know what they're all doing and give talks on their work, right? So this point about you need collaboration to solve a problem is really important. In this culture in North America, professors are taught to develop their own ideas and to compete, not to collaborate. If you write the thing like that, it will fail. So that leads to the question, what causes faculty to collaborate? Now, in our case, we all use common instrumentation. The topic is the use of X-ray lasers for biology. And we developed the instrumentation in the physics department for doing that. And so the other institutions have to use our equipment. And that's a big driver for collaboration. But you also get collaboration because of personal chemistry, and that can also cause lack of collaboration. And there's not much you can do about that. But choose people who are good citizens and who you think are good collaborators. You really don't want prima donnas and egotists involved in this thing. That'll cause it to fail. And remember, you're going to have to fire some of them. Let me just say, what are the worst questions you can be asked? There's an annual review, of course. You should, I think, have an international conference every year somewhere. This review panel is appointed by the NSF, not you. You have no choice on these people, and they will be the experts worldwide in this area. So here's 2 questions they can ask that you want to write down to think about. Is your STC doing the best work in the world now? Secondly, would this research have happened anyway if there wasn't an STC? So, of course, they're impossible questions to answer and very difficult, but at least they focus your attention. That's the kind of thing you can be asked about. And you have to set up an internal review panel which will evaluate the work of the faculty. Don't underestimate the amount of work in maintaining a web page. This has to be current, and that's at least a full-time job for someone to do that. The biggest risk, I would say, is mission creep. Write that down. no power on earth will prevent a young, enthusiastic scientist from developing their own ideas. And they may be in slightly different directions from the theme of the STC, in which case they're using the STC money to moonlight and do something different. And you can't allow that to happen. And that's a big problem. I'd say that over a 10-year period, that's probably the biggest problem. The other thing I would say is, I think ours has been very successful. Write this down. You want to co-opt the competition. Co-opt is an old word from the 60s. It's people like me who's, it means to take over and sort of incorporate. So you want to take over the competition. The way we did that, because somewhere in the world over 10 years, there's going to be a new group who are better than you, and they're going to make you get scooped, so you look stupid. You know? So what we did was to put aside a big chunk of our budget for an annual open competition to support any graduate student of any professor in the United States working on the theme of our STC. And we have about 8 of those every year. So this way, if someone starts up an operation that's competing with you and makes a discovery, because the discoveries are unanticipated, you know, breakthroughs must surprise, and surprise cannot be planned. It's something I once said to the DOE program manager. It's not a view that there's really very attractive if you're in the business of managing research, but it's true. So there's serendipitous discoveries, and in a period of 10 years, there's very likely to be some. So we have an open competition to fund graduate students who are not in our STC, but at other universities. And those collaborations have been extremely fruitful. Very good idea. It keeps you agile, moving with the field. What else? I've emphasized that most STC proposals fail because of their education program not being sufficiently creative. You know, summer camp for poor kids is not good enough. You have to do something fresh and original on diversity in education. I don't think we're allowed to use the word outreach anymore at NSF. They've changed the meaning of that. And I think the biggest problem for the director is simply to know what's going on. What's everyone doing? How do you find that out? And the way I've learned to do that, that's my job, is to just think about the timing. If you can get the annual review, now that's a big deal. I would require all the PIs to show up for that. It's going to be somewhere in the country. And, you know, penalize them if they don't. One of your problems is getting people to show up or reply to email. Remember, people don't reply to email much anymore. So it's a big problem, and they certainly don't read attachments. So think about communication. Now, what I've done that fixes this to some extent is to arrange for the international conference to be a few weeks before the site review. And then if the director is at the international conference, of course, they hear all the talks, and all the PIs, I would require them to attend that. I don't know how you force people to come, but make them a speaker, obviously, or have their students put in posters. And then at that conference, you can buttonhole all the leading PIs and make notes on what they're doing. Reading their papers is useless because it's a year old. And you have to write an annual report. This is a huge document. It's a lot of work. It's not enough just to ask the PIs to send in a summary of what they've been doing for the last year, because it'll be late. They won't reply to the email. And anyway, by the time you get it, it's too late. So someone has to know what's being done. Now, remember that Google Scholar, you can search by grant acknowledgement. And that's a quick way to find out what was done in your STC, you know, a year ago, but it's out of date. However, it's a pretty big start. And I wish people were more aware of that. That leads to the question of how do you get people to acknowledge the grant? We found that only about half of the papers which we support acknowledge the grant, 50%. So here's an example to think about that. Let's say a graduate student in the United States, supported by the STC award, helps get results on an instrumentation, an X-ray laser in our case, in South Korea, in a program of research directed by a Japanese professor. Will the Japanese professor put the STC acknowledgement in the paper that's eventually written 1.5, 2 years later? Almost certainly not. So you're up against that kind of thing. But this is management detail. You're probably less interested in that rather than how to get the award. I would say the key thing is what is the NSF and the referees looking for when they read your thing? The importance of the idea, the creativity and the originality of the education program. And they really want, you know, these people, they've been faculty themselves, so they know that faculty don't want to collaborate unless they have to. So they're looking for credible, genuine evidence of real collaboration. And you have to think about what causes faculty to collaborate to get that. Don't put too many people on it. What else? The final thing, external collaborations. I encourage that strongly now. I should say that ours has 7 campuses. By far the biggest is ASU involved. The award supports 7 faculty research programs, 7 200K grants at ASU. At the other universities, it supports 1. So the thing is very heavily lopsided towards ASU because we developed instrumentation and started, Rick Kirian in physics developed the software. Now, shared software is obviously a really big issue. That can be a basis for collaboration. But of course, we all know what software is like. Usually if students write original software, when they leave the university, it is never used again. And we all know that at IBM and Microsoft, they say it takes 50% of the effort to make any software user-friendly. Are you going to put that amount of money and time into making your software usable by the other members of the STC who've all want to develop their own programs? And it's a really big problem. But you could argue that shared development of software is going to be the basis for your collaboration. I don't know how that'll work out in practice, but it can work. It works out well. Remember this, students collaborate, it's only the faculty who don't. So, and the postdocs are somewhere in between. So you can work on that. So I've encouraged, and I started a program now where we collaborate with external faculty. That is to say, we will, the postdocs and students on our individual proposals will work with another professor who's not in the STC, but who's got a good idea and help them, get it working. That's a bit difficult for reasons of ego, but it's worked in 3 or 4 cases which have been amongst our most successful programs. This is Darwinian. If you can look around the world and see who's doing the best work and then take it on, become part of it, obviously you're going to do better than someone who chooses a topic that doesn't work out too well. So there's a Darwinian evolution thing going on. Because in order to collaborate with another professor who's not part of the STC, you have to ask the question, whose students or postdocs will do the work and who will pay for it? Well, it can work well if the professors happen to be good friends and get along and they have good personal chemistry. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say.
Okay, perfect. Then let me ask the audience if you guys have, thank you very much, Dr. Spence, that's fantastic. Super helpful. Yeah, super helpful. I will say that some of the things that you mentioned about designing collaborations and the space and time that it takes to maintain contact with the center participants is something that you'd want to roll into the white paper potentially as an integrative force, because there's an actual, and Kellyanne will talk this, but think about each of those sections and how you're going to address some of the current problems. If Dr. Spence is mentioning it as an issue, NSF for sure knows it's an issue. And so you wouldn't be calling them out. It's a human nature type of thing. So they'd want to see that you've thought all the way around that challenge in particular. If I understood that correctly. So even the award execution and maintaining and doing the site visits and the reporting should be alluded to, because they want to make sure that you're capable of understanding the workload. It is no small task. Both ERC directors will say that it is a challenge, and we're hearing that here. However, the rewards are that you get to do amazing science and make good in the world, which is overall
Yeah.
good.
Can I make one other quick comment?
Yeah.
Yes. The single most important thing, obviously, is the scientific idea, and let's not forget that. And these are wonderful awards. If you get one, it is fantastic because it really is focused on the science. And in a lot of NSF and NIH proposals now, there's more and more social engineering. And the social engineering is thoroughly admirable. Of course, prejudice is one of the great evils of the world, and we all support efforts to do that. But these STCs are unusual in that although diversity is an important aspect, you really spend most of your time working with good people on science, and it does induce collaboration. So the scientific idea is critical. So I would just say this, write this down. The first sentence must jump off the page. Do not put in a first sentence which is full of jargon and abstract sociological nonsense. Put the big scientific idea up front and center at the beginning.
And with that, that's perfect. Okay, so any other Greg, go ahead.
So John, thanks very much. Greg Rupp here. I had the pleasure of going to one of your site visits, and it is clear that the NSF thinks that you guys are doing the absolute top-notch science in the world. But I wondered if you, for the audience, talk also about the other side of the coin, the technology, because I think the other power of what you have is that technology side that's unique, and the linkage of the science with the technology.
Yeah, well, you see, we were lucky to come at it from the point of view of experimental physics. And we were also lucky to have a fantastic workshop at ASU, which is very inexpensive. So what happened in our case was that I had a kind of inside track because I was on the Department of Energy's BSEC committee. That's a committee that meets in Washington a couple of times a year to manage the research directions of all the national labs. For the most part, that means the synchrotrons. And I started on that in the year 2000. So I knew, because of that committee, that SLAC near Stanford were building the first X-ray laser in the world. So I had inside track there. But of course, it was all on the web, but people didn't take, and they were giving talks at conferences. Anyone could have known it. But that meant that I had about, in my group in physics, about 10 years to work with others like Uwe Varsdal and Rick Kirian to build equipment to help this program of biology with X-ray lasers get started before we applied to the STC. Now here's a critical point. The material on the web says that it must be a completely new idea with huge payoff. And if it's been shown that this idea works, it's not eligible for an STC. Well, I wouldn't take that too seriously, because in fact, we put in for an STC 4 years earlier in the previous cycle than the one which was funded, and it failed. And it failed because it was too new. So there's a crucial timing issue here. You need to put your STC proposal in for a big new idea when, I would put it this way, when there's a buzz at conferences. Write those words down. In other words, there has to be some evidence that your idea can work. If it's too new, people will just dismiss it. In our case, the idea was that you could outrun radiation damage. And people didn't believe that, and that's why the first STC proposal from us was turned down. But by the time of the second one, the timing was perfect, and that was pure luck. So there's this timing window when a new idea is being talked about as gossip at conferences, but hasn't really paid off yet. And if you get in at that moment, you'll get funded. That's very difficult to judge. We were just lucky. I don't know how you do that again.
Again, timing is everything.
But yeah, it is. But you asked about technology, and my answer there, well, it was the fact that we had a few years to build stuff in the ASU shop, and we had time to get it working. Takes a few years to refine the design. 3D printers didn't exist at that time, and we've got a wonderful submicron. They got the Nobel Prize for super resolution optical imaging. If you can image at super resolution, you can print at super resolution. And we have a nanoscribe printer at ASU now, 2-photon, which can make three-dimensional objects with 200 nanometer resolution. So that's made a huge difference, but that didn't exist when we started. So the answer on technology is we were lucky that we had a few years to get the gear working, largely due to Uwe Varstal, Rick Carrion, and others. And so we could put in a proposal which showed that because everyone had to share the same instrumentation, they would collaborate, and that the gear was starting to work. But it wasn't working so well that millions of people had done it, and then the referees would say, don't fund this, it's already been done.
I had a quick question. We're often asked if we have access to an STC successful proposal. Would you recommend sharing or looking at a successful proposal, even if it's 10 years out of date? And then,
well, it's 5 years out of date. I've sent it to Neil Woodbury already.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
of
then
course,
never
you're
mind.
welcome to look at that. I mean, I don't know whether if all the ones from ASU come in identical to that, is it going to look a bit funny? I don't know. You get ideas from it. A really good idea was Ed Latman's idea to use Puerto Rico. Now, at the time we started working with that university in Puerto Rico, it was before the hurricane. So it was perfect. And we fund research down there, and some of the faculty come to our meetings and come and work in labs here. That was a very good idea. And it's all even more urgent now that the place has been wiped out by the hurricane.
then my follow-up question to that is, how often do you interact with other STC directors and scientific advisors and other STCs? Are you part of a network, or are you kind of standing?
Well, the NSF runs an annual meeting of STC directors, and they all meet in some resort and talk about what they've been doing. I've got to tell you a funny story. Incidentally, Puerto Rico was a good choice because it's a territory. Therefore, have got a post office and you can go without a passport. One other thing, it's very important, write this down. The biggest problem you're going to have as a PI is with visas of foreign students. You can never be sure if one of your students you're supporting in the STC goes to a conference overseas that you'll ever see them again. This is a big problem. It happened to, I had one stuck in living in poverty at Heathrow Airport for weeks. The usual story, to continue to get back into America, he had to go to the town in India which issued his visa. The problem is not the US visas, it's often the visas in the countries they come from, and so on. What were we talking about before? I've forgotten.
Networks. STC networks.
Yeah. Okay, well, the other STCs, I got to tell you a good story. But in the effort to get ours, I went to Harvard and had lunch with a couple of senior, very elderly faculty there who previously had them, to talk to them. And one of them had just been to ASU and been given a tour of the Leroy Eyring Center for Solid State Science. And he said to me that he was very impressed by the extent of collaboration at ASU. And I said, well, don't you do that here in Harvard? And he just looked at me and he said, Harvard professors don't collaborate. So, and of course this is the European tradition of the God professor, but it does make you ask how they got an STC. So that's a different culture, which we don't really have at ASU. I would say that collaboration is pretty good at ASU. And a sufficiently exciting scientific theme. We're asking the question, what causes faculty to collaborate? A sufficiently exciting scientific idea does. In addition to shared instrumentation, shared software. Software has all kinds of problems, as you know, but those are the only three I can think of. Well, there's one other. If you have one person, we had John Cowley, a very famous professor here for many years. If you have one person who's just a genius, then it does tend to get people to work together and suppress competing egos, So intellectual leadership can cause people to collaborate.
Okay, perfect. I will also say that as part of the development, our staff, and if you're in engineering or a geos, I'm sure that staff will support you to get external reviews, and we have that all in place. We have a fairly robust system for doing that. So we will enable that collaboration and connection. I'm gonna leave it there. So now, in the interest of time, thank you, Dr. Spence, really appreciate that. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can't finish this presentation that I have started.
Or share, start your,
Because I can't see share.
I'm just kidding. Just start the slideshow.
Okay, I'm just doing what LJ tells me to do.
I think it's already sharing.
Yeah, is it not?
It's
So,
working.
If you're online, are you seeing slideshow?
Yes, it's working.
perfect, okay, then we'll just run with it. So limited submissions is next. Go home. And I'm moving it. You mean you don't, that slide? You can't see the slide? Actually, I can totally do that. Okay. Sure.
Just to make sure I understand. That for the lead institution and the partner institutions.
Correct.
Okay, so it's actually yours.
Oh, yeah. No, and then the ERCs are funded between four. This one has more money than an ERC. And that says a lot about the system. However, the partnerships, when compared to ERCs, are the number of institutions that are involved in STCs is larger on average than an ERC. The ERC has a minimum and maximum, has a minimum requirement, and budget for $8-ish million. So it's something to think about. The mechanism of the STC is slightly different than an ERC. It should go, money should be And LJ wants me to give you a muff. Thank you for your hard question.
Yeah. Why do I get
Next hard question is muff. Okay.
Limited submissions don't have any hard questions. It's the standard limited submissions process. This is for transparency, equality amongst limited submissions. We ask for the 3 to 5 page summary, and I noted that it should mirror the preliminary council contents sections of the RP, and then a 2-page CV for every investigator, also the partner list of organizations, also presentation, and then it's due April 10th. Yeah.
The CV should be for the broader group of institutions, or just ASU?
Yeah. Yeah, so we leave that up to the investigator to decide who they want to include. I say everybody. Because we are asking for your partnering organizations, you have to include everybody. How many CVs you include? Oh, sure. Yeah, we don't limit how many CVs you include. You can decide that for yourself, but I would say more the better.
When is the pre-proposal?
Yeah, June 25th. And so, according to our schedule, we would have the reviews for the limited submissions done by April 26th, and then you would have 8 weeks to prepare your proposal.
I do recommend, as Haley said and noted here, follow the template for the full
It's intended to mirror it, so it's not a two-step process. It's preparation, passing the submissions. We want to move there.
Yeah, it's very tight, understandably.
Yeah.
We just got this notification on the agenda. If we get the reviews done quicker, get you notification. For the preliminary,
Very short. And we had general discussion. And there's a big challenge in it, right? How way is that?
for this one, you don't need to have concrete relationship. You must have concrete.
No, I understand that, but it's going to be convincing.
We can do this. Get it out of the way. Or leave it here in 6 weeks. There's no good way to do it. So this is what we've optimized for for the conversation. It's challenging. We did have 3 years to prepare.
When it goes to deadline, you have not enough time to prepare the proposal, and then
And it will be a tight competition. There's everybody in the room. Great.
So let's round it up.
No, for this, no, I don't think we have time. I think we decided that if you are interested in the presentations that happened in November, I can certainly show you that PDFs of those. I can send it around. I stand under mic to do that. And then, so I can share the PDFs of the previous presentations that were sent around, which is, I was also going to mention after the Dr. Spence, that if you're interested in the research of education and finding someone who can do evaluation, we had presenters at those events from Teachers College and from CREST, the evaluation services at ASU, who will also be able to help you design your program. They are exceptional human beings and should be brought into your team, at least spoken to. If you do your education program in-house, you might have a partner who also wants to contribute to designing your education. All right, I hear somebody unmuting.
Just a quick comment on that. We actually pay a professor in Florida who is a specialist in statistical evaluation of outreach and diversity programs. And every year at our national conference, she gives a fascinating talk on gender bias and diversity based on the statistics she's collected on the behavior of all the PIs and students. Well, of course, she takes polls from the students and asks them what they think, what are the women's opinions and so forth. So she collects data all through the year and produces a report. And it's fascinating to hear every year. Fortunately, ours has been favorable so far, but there are problems, and you'll see this. You have to have a specialist and you have to pay them.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, I'll stop.
Yeah, that's all for limited submissions.
Yeah, and Haley will still be here if you have questions. I'm gonna run through the requirements for the preliminary proposal and the evaluation criteria, and then I'll also very quickly touch on the requirements for the full proposal, just so you guys can keep those in mind, and then we can do questions, but I know we're running up against time here. Okay, so for the preliminary proposal, you have 12 pages, and you have 4 required sections for those 12 pages. Center rationale, the center plan, the description of your team, people and partnerships, and then the integration strategies that you'll use to cover all of the different aspects of the program. Again, here's this list of project personnel and the list of institutions and organizations, so follow that for the limited submissions. Again, evaluation criteria, you'll have the intellectual merit and broader impact, and then additionally you're going to have 4 others. These map really nicely to the requirements. We're lucky here. So they're going to evaluate you on the rationale for the STC. What's your vision? Is the STC an appropriate vehicle? Is the investment warranted at this time? Getting at that timing piece. You're going to have the research plan. Will be evaluated. Again, your partnerships and participants, you really need to show that everybody is here for a reason, that you did not just pick your friends and the people down there. And then the integration strategies, again, this gets at the leadership and the management strategies across the education, the knowledge transfer, and the diversity and broadening participation goals. So I'm going to go over the full proposal, and then we can walk back for questions. For the full proposal, you're going to have 25 pages. You're going to have a couple more sections here that get into the education, broadening participation, knowledge transfer. You will have a management plan. A couple interesting things down here. You're going to have an ethics plan that's 1 page. You're going to have a shared experimental facilities 2-pager in addition to your regular facilities document. And then you're going to have the data management plan, postdoctoral researching plan, a mentoring plan. Budget justification here, it's only 2 pages per organization, which is pretty small, keep that in mind, but it is per organization. And then the project summary is 2 pages, longer than equal. Here's the timeline, and then I'll just leave this up, and then if people have questions, I can flip back to the preliminary requirements or anything else. So we've talked about how the budget is really actually very small if you're, having a very good breadth of other institutions. Is there a suggestion on the lead having, 60% or 30%? Like, is there any sort of hinting towards how we manage it without taking more of the money, which is generally very common? Nothing that I saw in the solicitation. The one comment that I saw that gets at who's going to get what piece of the pie is that not everybody needs to be involved in every aspect of the STC, you can have partners that come in just for one small piece, but you just need to show that overall integration. So,
Well, if I could comment on that. So it's 50 million for 10 years, 25 million for 5 years, and then there's a major review. So that's 5 million a year. And I think you almost nearly half the budget will go in non-research activity. So that would, you know, so you could comfortably say you've got 2 million a year. Now, if you've got 5 institutions, and one rule of thumb might be you don't want to give a leading professor is a leader in the field, less than perhaps 200,000 a year. But actually, so I was saying before, 5 institutions should be the maximum. Well, that's only 1 million. Wait, but there's overhead. So yeah, those are very rough numbers.
Very tiny. Yeah. The thing to note is that because I was involved in the ERC production for Dr. Kabzanjian, is that really with 5 universities, you got 250,000 a year, and they had mandated 2 graduate students. There's no mandate here, so it goes fast.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that NSF thinks about both ERCs and STCs and MRSECs, all of their central awards, as the glue that binds people together, not the funding for the core research programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so the expectation is you're bringing together people who have fully funded labs that are already operating and working, and the STC money is really about bringing them together to do the next level of activity. Now, of course, your PIs won't think about it that way, but that's how NSF is imagining what they're trying to accomplish. And the more you can convince your team of that, I think the better off you'll all be.
Absolutely.
I think I completely agree. And one way to put it is just keep in mind this idea that the collaboration is necessary to make the scientific breakthrough. It's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good. Okay,
no, just another quick note. All of the preliminary proposals will get proposal management support if you want it and need it. So that'll come out of
our shop or engineering or geo. Somebody will be there with you, and then everybody will have access to the art director and RD, who's Michael Northrop. He's amazing. If you want it, we won't force it. It's there if you want it, after the 3 are selected. Okay, in the interest of time, I want to thank you very much thank you, Haley and Kellyanne. So the next steps, which we can see in the room, but you cannot online, is just prepare for your limited submissions and notify your research administrator. And I'm going to go back to timeline real quick. Last question?
Yeah, I already have a mug. I was curious if you guys will be doing any leading or orchestrating. Because, for example, I'm considering leading one, but I also want to work.
The time is too short, because I mean, if we convened in the next week and then you had another week to do the limited submissions, it's just too short. So there's no opportunity to do so. But I would encourage you to reach out to people online who are interested and just get cracking on it to see if people want to convene. But I will, to Greg's point, I will send out those PDFs from the last couple of meetings that we had. They were all great. And there are people in the room who have a very solid idea who are pursuing one. So I can tell you who those are too, because they've let it. I mean, you can if you want to shout out that you're going to pursue one. I mean, it's showing your card, so you don't have to. But a raise of hands. Dr. Kimball's going to, Dr. Saylor, and then yeah. So there you go. So those are the people you want to join the team with, and online. So I would just simply ask and see if there's a place for you. Yeah. We're expecting probably less than 10, more than 5 submissions for limited submissions. Just so you know. Okay, thank you all for attending. Thank you online. And we'll send out all of the ancillary documents as well to all the registrations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spence.